Greetings and salutations. I'm Russell Kirkby, Dungeon Master, actor, writer, director, and I've been playing D&D and other role-playing games since 1987 when I was 10. Today's video is going to be about milestones versus XP leveling. Firstly, I want to say that no system is better than the other. This is all about what works for your group. What works for my group might be different to what works for you. There are pros and cons to both systems. My system is milestone leveling, and that's what works for me because my game is more of a narrative and role-playing kind of focused game. So if you have another focus in your game, which might be more mechanical or more combat oriented, or it's more of a war gamey type of scenario, there's lots of reasons why you might want to use XP leveling. The main objection I see to milestone leveling is this idea that players like to anticipate when they're going to go up a level. They like to keep a track of their XP so that they have this sense of anticipation, and this gives them a certain amount of player agency, so they know they can kind of plan for it. They can sort of feel the level coming, and that can be a big part of the game to certain people. But for me personally, I like to use milestones for a whole bunch of other reasons, and I'm going to go into that now. So why do I use milestones instead of experience points? So the first point really is that milestones give the Dungeon Master the ability to control the player character's level in relation to the story arc, the story that they're telling. So I find that that's quite empowering as a Dungeon Master, because for me, it's all about the narrative and the role-playing and the storytelling. So having the ability to know when you want the players to level up and when is appropriate for them to level up it's a really empowering element. Using challenge ratings and XP to prefigure your milestones in your adventures is still important as a guide, but you don't have to feel trapped by it. This also allows for your players to level together, so that you don't have this discrepancy where there's one member of the party's ahead of everybody else, or any of those sorts of problems which can occur, and that can cause all kinds of drama within the group. Usually it's not like a big drama, but it can be a subtle undercurrent that can lead to some dissatisfaction. Also, I think using milestones is convenient. So it's convenient for a whole bunch of reasons, the least of which is that you can level between sessions, and that doesn't halt the story in mid-flow. So this is especially important in a role-playing heavy campaign or game. So you have this sort of nature of no man is being left behind, and at the same time, you're not interrupting the game or the story, between fights to level up your characters, which also begs the whole question of, when do you do training and all of that sort of stuff, because some DMs, they're not concerned about that, and that's fine. In fact, sometimes I don't consider myself to be all that worried about letting characters go off and do training and incorporating that whole element of it. But at other times, I feel it's important. It would be unrealistic for the characters to suddenly just learn some spells or have some new abilities that kind of came out of nowhere. Well, why weren't they using that before when they were fighting the goblins, this begs a bunch of questions. So XP leveling versus milestone leveling. The milestones can allow you to build in story points where you can have the players actually do some training and learn their new skills from a mentor or train by themselves, or however you want to do it as the Dungeon Master. Now, I got to propose to you that if waiting for XP and achieving XP and anticipating XP is the most interesting and exciting part of your game for your players, this does beg the question of whether or not your players are really fully engaged in your story and your role-playing and their game experience. I personally would rather that my players were anticipating the next scene. They were anticipating engaging with the next NPC because it's going to be interesting and exciting, because anything could happen, because they're going to be, they should be excited. To me at least, they should be excited about being in character and being in the immersion of the world. And XP for me pulls them out of that whole immersive experience. So, I mean, what you could do is you could use XP as a way of buying time for planning. I'm basically saying that if your characters, if your players are gaining XP, and if they're paying more attention to the XP than to you and your story, then you know that your story probably needs a bit more work. And maybe you can put more effort into some other area. So, that's one argument for using XP. If they're not concentrating on what's in front of them in the game and their objectives, their personal objectives, maybe this tells you something about the game and what you could do to improve it if you feel it needs any improvement at all. It might not. So another element that I really like about Milestone Leveling is that it removes mechanics. And my overall philosophy to role-playing games is that one should, in my opinion, and I could really only talk for myself, but you might resonate with this. In my opinion, you should remove as many mechanics as you possibly can, as often as possible. Now, the point of mechanics to me, when you want to use mechanics, is when you need to provide some kind of arbitration between players and NPCs, or between player characters themselves. In fact, that is the single most important time to use mechanics, when players are wrestling with each other for some reason over something, somehow, whether it's charisma checks or strength checks or grappling, or trying not to let someone go into the room because they've been charmed, or whatever. There could be a reason. Also for fairness. But also, if there are some times when mechanics actually do heighten the immersion and they do heighten the tension, basically through the probability of failure. When there's a possibility that the players might fail at something, that's when mechanics can make it exciting and interesting when you roll checks. And I'm not saying that I don't ever roll checks, because that would be absurd. I roll a lot of checks, actually, but I try to keep the checks related to the story as much as possible. And as long as they drive the story forward, they reveal something about the plot, the theme, the characters, or they are simply there for tension. So that we're all sitting there going, what's going to happen? That's a great feeling, So that's when mechanics are useful. But as far as experience points are concerned, I don't feel that experience points provide that same kind of drama or tension. And it's more of a meta tension. It's more of a tension it comes back to anticipation. So when you're anticipating your leveling, it's like you're waiting for your birthday cake. I get it, but I still feel that anticipation could be better served somewhere else. There are other things to anticipate in the game. Your players, another main reason that you might consider using mechanics in the game is because the players are expecting you to, because this is a convention of the game that you're playing. You're playing Dungeons and Dragons. These are the rules of Dungeons and Dragons. Everybody accepts those rules. Everybody knows those rules. Everybody's familiar with those rules. And so there's an expectation on you to use this particular system of mechanics. Now, the truth is that there are two systems provided. There's XP and there's milestone leveling. So as long as you are clear about that at the beginning of the campaign, I don't think the players are going to openly rebel and lynch you, or even worse, call the D&D police and report you to Matt Mercer. So basically, as far as mechanics go, I would remove anything that gets in the way of the drama and the role-playing. And in this regard, I feel that XP is distracting on a whole raft of levels. Do you see what I did there? Level. It allows you to build encounters as you're going along that suit the party's current situation. If you plan your whole game ahead of time, which you should do, but you've built it according to the experience point system and the challenge rating system, which I'm not arguing against. You should definitely use those things as a guide when you're building your story and your encounters. But if you're trying to run the whole game maintaining that whole system rigidly and firmly, like it's some kind of cage that you've been trapped inside of, that doesn't allow you any dynamic to allow you to adjust it as you go along. I mean, okay, take for example, in the party's current situation, they might have had a lot of bad luck in one fight. They might have rolled a bunch of ones. They might have had a bunch of critical failures. They might have gotten smashed by whatever mobs they're fighting. And now they've got, they're low on hit points, they're low on spells. And this was not something you anticipated, because, the average fight of this caliber, they should have steamrolled it, or they should have at least gotten through it without too much of a problem. I mean, if you're using something like D&D Beyond, when you're encounter building, it will tell you whether the encounter is easy, normal, hard, difficult, and deadly. I think those are the categories, something along those lines anyway. So you should know how difficult the challenge should be from the outset. But if it turns out that they've had a lot of bad luck, that challenge might have actually been a lot harder than you were expecting. So now you want them to go into the next fight, and now you have the opportunity to actually adjust that fight on the fly. You don't have to stick to what you wrote down on your piece of paper in your guide to what you're going to do, your play sheet or whatever you call it. So keep that in mind. You can adjust the next fight scene to match and continue the tension without needing to take constant short rests and long rests. And one of the issues with taking short rests and long rests, whilst, it's a good idea for players to do that if they, they're down on hit points, they need their spells back, take a short rest, take a long rest. It's a great idea. And I encourage players to do that, and not just go running, charging into the next boss fight or the next fight without considering what their situation is before doing so. But as a DM, you're a storyteller, and one of the tools that you have as a storyteller is what they call in screenwriting a time lock. And a time lock is essentially a situation where the players have to reach an obstacle or overcome an obstacle within a certain amount of time. And if you have players that are constantly taking short rests and long rests, that chews up an awful lot of that potential time. Time is basically being lost or wasted doing that. And this, every time you take a short rest or a long rest, I mean, unless you throw in some encounters during that, which kind of nullifies the whole point of them being able to get their spells back and their hit points back, you are undermining the time lock, and undermining the tension. So, just be careful about that. That's something I would suggest, is to try and minimize the amount of short and long rests that are absolutely necessary. And maybe you can even plan those into the structure of your story, so that they work between time locks rather than during them. Missing the objective in time results in failure, part or full, and it has consequences. It doesn't have to end the game or kill the story, but it will certainly be a plot point that spins the story in a new direction. Right? Having the party stop and randomly rest, that just annihilates this entire dramatic premise of a time lock, and it basically becomes unworkable. If you don't have the freedom to alter your encounters, you can end up with characters having to take short or long rests in places where you've got time locks, and that will interfere in your story and your game. So another major issue is that when you see players that are playing for experience points, they're focused on experience points. They're writing down every little tiny thing they kill. Oh, I killed a spider, I want an experience point. Oh, I killed a rat. And they can go chasing experience points too, because they're like, oh, I only need 30 XP to get to the next level. I'm going to go and kill a bear. Now, this is metagaming. The character doesn't know they need 30 experience points, so they're not going to go and kill a bear. That's just silly. That's metagaming, and it's not good metagaming either. Like, there is good metagaming and bad metagaming. You can find out more about that elsewhere, but let's just say that for this premise, it's not good metagaming. This is another situation where XP takes the focus off the story, it destroys immersion, and it has the players lusting for rewards instead of focusing on what's in front of them in the story. They're no longer maintaining their character. They're no longer maintaining the consensus narrative, which has now been compromised by this metagaming. Now, you have two choices to deal with this anticipation about leveling and collecting experience points. The first one, you can simply beat it out of them. You can beat it out of your players. Let them know that they will level when the story arc requires them to, and not before. They will level when you say so, and if they accept that fact, they'll just forget about it, and this will no longer be an issue, right? There are plenty of other things in the game to keep them interested and excited, hopefully, if you're doing your job. So they're not going to go seeking 500 sewer rats and a stray dog just to hit their XP cap, right? Now they're not worrying about that. That stuff's no longer relevant. So that's one thing. The next thing you can do is you can give them a time frame. Like, for example, if you tell them, okay, so you're level 1, and after the first session, you might hit level 2. At level 2, it's going to take 2 sessions to hit level 3. At level 3, it's going to take 3 sessions to reach level 3. You can work it out in advance however you want. It doesn't have to be those particular things. It depends on how far you want the characters to get, how quickly, and that's up to you. And it also comes down to how long your campaign is. I mean, maybe you don't want to keep your characters trapped at level 1, 2, and 3 for all that long. You want to get them further into the play sooner than later. Not necessarily, but these are all options for you. This empowers you as the dungeon master. You can also add tension by creating a proviso that your time frame is an estimate, and it's based on their completing certain story goals or character objectives. So that might be, you're going to defeat the dragon. That's going to level you up from A to B. If you reach this particular plot point where something happens, that's going to level you up from A to B. If you reach some kind of personal character objective, that could level you up. There are all sorts of different ways to provide them with anticipation, but also to make caveats on that, whereby if they circumvent the plot somehow and they simply go around the objectives, and to be fair, that's good planning, that's good thinking, that's problem solving. That's all worthy of experience points. One of the objections that I have against experience points is that there are 3 pillars in Dungeons and Dragons of the game. And the first pillar is combat, then we have role-playing, and then we have exploration. And if we only get experience points for combat, well, we're really not encouraged to do role-playing or exploration. We're just going to seek out combat constantly and try and solve every problem with combat, when in fact we could be using stealth, we could be using diplomacy, we could be using general problem-solving skills to overcome our obstacles. So in summary, using milestones puts the focus on the story and the role-playing. It removes mechanics and bookkeeping. It encourages and empowers dungeon masters to be more inventive, immersive, and versatile, while de-incentivizing combat solutions, or at least combat-only solutions, over stealth, diplomacy, and problem-solving. D&D has 3 pillars. Why would you just reward one of them? All right, thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you got something out of it. Please subscribe. I'd really appreciate that. And thank you for sticking around.